Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
There we go, that is on now. My name is Reverend Laura Smitzik. I use she, her pronouns. I am the minister that serves this lovely congregation. I am joined today by Katie Johnson, who is the president of the Board of Trustees. It sounded kind of tinny. Does it sound tinny to you? Oh, that's getting better. Better. Much better. If you didn't have a chance to see the video and read the letter that went out this past week, I'm glad I put tissues in because I can already feel my throat tightening up a little bit. It may come as a surprise this morning that I've decided to step down from my role as serving of the minister of this church. There you go. Take it in the first 2 seconds, and I'm already on a roll. It feels right to not carry on just as usual this Sunday. So we decided to take this morning to pause together for a while. Oh, I actually have a cup in my pocket. I preloaded. My hope is that our time together today gives us an opportunity to feel and reflect and to be together in this threshold moment in the congregation. Wow. We are a community that draws on the shared values in the beautiful display behind me of mindful interdependence, authentic curiosity, and courageous love. We welcome you who are here for the first time, but I don't think I see any. Oh, there might be some newcomers who are here for the first time, and those of you who are joining us in person, and those of you online. It is really good to be together in whatever ways are possible today. We're recording the whole service. We will just use the reflection, the sermon, as the part that will be posted online. If you're joining us online, we're really glad you're here as always. The chat feature will be open throughout the service, so feel free to use that. And there is going to be a time where Linda and I are going to be actually picking things from what you're saying and writing them on sheets of paper. If you're here today, the restroom is down the hall. Make yourself comfortable here. In an effort to practice radical hospitality, we ask folks to make name tags if you can. Other logistics are just that, well, actually, I'll just move on to announcements. Lori, you got an announcement about the service auction? And then Name Choice Task Force will be up next.
Well, the donation submission process closed on Friday. I don't know exactly how many we got, but I know it was well over 40, so I think we're going to have an exciting auction. Bidding is going to open next Friday, the 16th. That's for the silent auction and the fixed price items that will be online. I would like to ask for volunteers to bring some cookies or bars for dessert on the 24th. So if you are willing to do that, send me an email or let me know today. And I just wanted to emphasize that one of the big benefits of participating in the auction is the social connections that it provides, small group interactions. You also just learn a lot based on what you've donated. So lot of benefits, but that social connection is probably the biggest one. I wanted to just mention the accessibility of the church. There's 5 handicap accessible parking spots in front, but we're recommending that you go to the back of the church. There's a parking lot there. It's level access to the building, and then there's an elevator right inside the doors. So it's very accessible, and the social hall will be evident when you get off the elevator in the building. So with that, just hope to see everybody there on the 24th, and let me know if you can provide some bars or cookies for dessert. Thanks.
Thanks to Lori and Deb Schneider who are taking the lead on this. Lori, you have been doing this for so many years, it's kind of amazing. And maybe next week you can help kind of describe about going online, because I didn't do it last year, and I think for those of you who maybe didn't do it last year either, it might be good to get a little primer. Byron.
Good morning. These announcements are almost at an end because we're almost done with the first vote for our name change. And then we'll get a break for a while. So as of this morning, we have somewhere around 30 ballots returned, and we're hoping for somewhere between 40 and 50. So looking at some of you.
You know who you are.
Oh, yes, that got edited out. You know who you are. Yes. And remember that voting is open to members and friends. We want to hear from non-members about what our name should be, because you are the market we're chasing. If you have not voted yet, please look in your inbox for an email containing a ballot and instructions for returning it. There are also paper ballots on the back table, so please take one of those if that makes you feel a little bit more guilty. Please try to return your ballot by Wednesday by some means, and we're now accepting them by owl as a desperation. So if you have an owl that can fly to my house, send your owl with your ballot. I don't accept pigeons. I do accept owls, though. In the Thursday update next week, we will have a link to a list of the ballots we've received. So check that list, and if you think your name should be on that, contact the office at msuu.org, and then a named task force person will get in touch with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Byron. This upcoming Thursday is the third Thursday. That means we hold our monthly Third Thursday group, which is for 60-plussers. We gather at Pilgrim House at 11 o'clock. We have a facilitated conversation for an hour, and then we share a potluck lunch. So please feel free to come. You don't have to RSVP for that. Also, anyone, whether you are a member, a newcomer, or a friend, are welcome to all of our programming. We try to do most of it as a hybrid, so you can join us online or in person, except for things like Third Thursday, because we're eating together. So just pay attention to our Thursday update. If you do not receive that, you can let me know or sign up in the back of the room and just check a box that you'd like to be your name to be shared on our list. Bruce, our Director of Music Ministry, is in LA today, so we have Chad, who will be playing hymns on the guitar. What?
And Polly.
Oh, and Polly. Hi, Polly. Hi. Good to see you. Polly's back there with the drum. She's going to be pounding that along the way. Our volunteer tech team includes Linda and Byron, and Lori Young brings the flowers each week. If you would like to sponsor them, you can let her know. People often name them in honor of someone or something, so feel free to do that if you would like to support it in that way. And then Katie and Janice Sancock are our slide queens who create these beautiful images for us. Once again, welcome to our service today. We hope you find these Sunday mornings are a time of sanctuary, reflection, connection, and joy.
This reading is titled Heartbreak by David White. It's from a book called Consolations. Heartbreak is unpreventable, the natural outcome of caring for people and things over which we have no control, of holding in our affections those who inevitably move beyond our line of sight. Heartbreak begins the moment we are asked to let go, but cannot. In other words, it colors and inhabits and magnifies each and every day. Heartbreak is not a visitation, but a path that human beings follow through even the most average life. Heartbreak is an indication of our sincerity in a love relationship, in a life's work, in trying to learn a musical instrument, in the attempt to shape a better, more generous self. Heartbreak is the beautifully helpless side of love and affection, and is just as much an essence and an emblem of care as the spiritual athlete's quick but abstract ability to let go. Heartbreak has its own way of inhabiting time and its own beautiful and trying patience in coming and going. Heartbreak is how we mature. Yet we use the word heartbreak as if it only occurs when things have gone wrong, an unrequited love, a shattered dream, a child lost before their time. Heartbreak, we hope, is something we can avoid, something to guard against, a chasm to be carefully looked for and then walked around. The hope is to find a place where the hope is to find a way to place our feet where the elemental forces of life will keep us in the manner to which we want to be accustomed, and which will keep us away from the losses that all other human beings have experienced, without exception, since the beginning of conscious time. But heartbreak may be the very essence of being human, of being on the journey from here to there, of coming to care deeply for what we find along the way.
So I remember the start of August 2016. I was alone in the Oakley Drive building for the majority of my first day. Lori Young stopped over with some flowers or something and greeted me. I remember I sat in the sanctuary uncertain about what was ahead. All the congregations I had been affiliated with prior were large congregations. There wasn't a moment in a traditional work week in those buildings where there weren't at least 8 people in the building. And often there were staff members and volunteers and ministers all roaming the hallways and greeting each other. The silence was overwhelming. I brought with me into the sanctuary a book of blessings that I learned to love in seminary, and I lit a candle, and I sat in the silence and I read this poem by John O'Donohue. For a New Beginning. In the out-of-way places of the heart, where your thoughts never think to wander, this beginning has been quietly forming, waiting until you are ready to emerge. For a long time, it's watched your desire, feeling the emptiness growing inside you, noticing how you willed yourself on, still unable to leave what you had outgrown. I watched you play with the seduction of safety and the gray promises that sameness whispered. Heard the waves of turmoil rise and relent, wondered, would you always live like this? Then the delight, when your courage kindled and out you stepped onto new ground and your eyes young again with energy and dream, a path of plenitude opening before you. Though your destination is not yet clear, you can trust the promise of this opening. Unfurl yourself into the grace of beginning. That is one with your life's desire. Awaken your spirit to adventure, hold nothing back. Learn to find ease in risk. Soon you will be home in a new rhythm, for your soul senses the world that awaits for you. O'Donohue's words reflected several truths in my life at that time. You see, I felt called to this congregation, not by a deity. Nope, I remember having lunch with Sarah Green, sitting at a table, talking about the newly born twins, and she was asking if I'd ever be interested in this position. Deanne Pryor, who many of you knew in her final months, asked me directly if I would apply. Being with all of you at Christine Spirits Wolf's memorial service and then at Deanne's service, I shared with you before I shared this story with you before. Some of you may not have heard it, but I spoke at both of those services. And I remember showing up to Deanne's. I was late because I had put it incorrectly in my calendar. I was sitting on Oakley Drive in my car because the parking lot was full, and I was having a conversation with myself about why am I not applying to this congregation. I came in those doors. I was in the foyer. There was Carlotta, who probably was already likely experiencing some of the symptoms of the disease that would end her life a few years later. Carlotta saw me arrive. She asked if I was Laura Wise, kissed me on my cheek, and pushed me forward down the aisle. Those of you who know the Oakley Street building, there was just one center aisle. When I'm being facetious, I call it the aisle of shame for people who are late or people who decide to sit up front with children who actually have to express needs loudly and they have to leave the service. They are seen by everyone in the room. I also recently was talking with Lisa Munson Hokinson, and I remember during my candidating week, she walked across the social hall and she said to me, I just looked at you and I knew you were our minister. That's not like Lisa, honestly, those of you who know her. Donahue says, this beginning has been quietly forming, waiting until you were ready to emerge. For a long time, it has watched your desire. It's watched you play with the seduction of safety and the gray promises of sameness. I was working at White Bear UU at the time. I was the minister of membership when I heard about this position. My role was clearly too confining for my spirit and too limited for this generalist human being that I am. I had a pivotal conversation with my spiritual director, Kate Tucker, who you met a couple weeks ago when she preached. I was saying how I love the lead minister at White Bear. It's Victoria Safford. I'm still in love with her and friends with her. And I knew, however, that I wouldn't be able to grow into my full potential as long as I was on staff there. I used the metaphor of a forest, of a beautiful, strong tree with a big canopy reaching up into the sky, and with me under the canopy, near that strong tree, with no access to rain or sunshine or the sky, no possibility of growth under that beautiful canopy. And it was during that conversation with Kate that she encouraged me to apply. This was the only congregation I applied to, and I did my due diligence of contacting the regional person and Reverend Dana, who served prior, and Reverend Karen, who was the interim. They all confirmed that you were a healthy congregation, which I found encouraging, and I loved your connection to the Unitarian Universalist Association in the region. It's uncommon for a congregation of your side to be that deeply connected to the larger movement. I also heard that this is a congregation that treats their ministers well, and honestly, that's not guaranteed in many congregations. Remember when I spoke during the forum a couple weeks ago about the UU trinity of errors, and one of them was anti-authoritarianism, which often pops up in our tradition. Many congregations are suspicious of ministerial authority. Don't get me wrong, I did encounter some of that in the early days, some folks who purposely found a need to be antagonistic in order to strike balance with those of you who were too agreeable. I love them just the same. Donahue says, then the delight. Oh no, this is actually David White. David White, and Katie and I have been talking about David White because she found his book Consolation, so I've been perusing that a little bit. He says, then the delight, when your courage kindled, and you stepped out onto new ground, your eyes young again with energy and dream, a plenitude opening before you. It was something to be called as your minister. Within the first few months, Bob Randall died and Trump was elected. We gathered in a circle with a photo of Bob and lit candles, and we told stories of his life. We gathered in the sanctuary, and then we ate in the social hall the night after the election, speaking out loud our fears, our sadness, our worries, and our disbelief. I remember contacting the Republicans in the congregation at that time and letting them know we were holding a vigil and that it wasn't going to be a bash Trump session, but instead a reverent time together as a community. It's been an honor, such a deep honor, to be able to convene people in the congregation during times of joy and sorrow. As I read the words, you can trust the promise of this opening, unfurl yourself into the grace of the beginning. That is at one with your life's desire. Awaken your spirit to adventure, hold nothing back. Learn to find ease in risk. Soon you will be in a new rhythm, for your soul senses the world that awaits you. Couldn't really imagine all the richness and the laughter, the depth of connection and the thoughtfulness, the challenges and the sheer joy and tenderness that would come in the years ahead. It's been an extraordinary experience to be in shared ministry with a congregation this size, humbling to say the least. And it has stretched me in ways that I didn't even know were possible. Things have changed in my life over the last 8 years. My mom, who would often show up to services on her own, who was once my favorite fellow adventurer, she would always say yes to whatever I proposed we do together, has now moved into memory care. I'm the family member in town who takes care of her, and although there isn't a competition with my time, I feel the pull with her intention with the work of this congregation. I find that it's not just the impact of time that weighs on me, but also the emotional impact of watching my mom change so drastically over time. I feel really honored to be close to her and to be the family member that shares her daily life, and it has depleted parts of me that I used to have available. I came back from my sabbatical just so hopeful that I could continue for more years, and instead I found that by the fall my deep weariness had returned, and with that, a malaise about the finer details that make a place like this run. Don't get me wrong, I'm still very much in it. I'm staying on top of things, I'm focused on the present and the future, but I'm also longing to find a role that's just less than this one. I've served as the leader of 4 organizations: Rainbow Families, Project 515, Moose Jaw, Minnesota UU Social Justice Alliance, and here, and I find that I no longer need to be that tree with the canopy. I don't want to be the one in the highest professional position. I'm ready to step down and find a role with some shade that I don't have to carry with me even when I clock out of the office, as they say. I don't know what's next. I plan to focus here in the months ahead, and I'll turn to what's next after I leave. Buddhist Sharon Salzberg says, "For me, faith has a lot to do with courage, and it's the courage to step forward into the unknown, and first of all, to admit we don't know." You know, we can be so afraid to admit that and try to be in control of absolutely everything, and to actually admit that we don't know, and yet to say, you know, I have the strength to go forward anyway and to embrace what happens and to have an open-hearted participate in life. You know, for me, she says, that's the meaning of faith. So we will move faithfully together in the months to come. I remember one of my first sermons here that I gave, I quoted Heraclitus. I know I should be able to say that. A friend of mine in the kitchen just spit it out. He's a Greek philosopher. He's actually in our hymnal with a reading called "Change Alone is Unchanging." I had referred to this, and I think maybe it was even my sermon as I was candidating. He says, "Change alone is unchanging. Some roads go both up and down. The beginning of the circle is also its end. Everything comes in a season." His metaphor of a river has struck me ever since. He said, I'm going to remove the gender specifics of this because, you know, he was a Greek philosopher, so clearly there was some gender specification. He said, "No one ever steps into the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and they are not the same person." I'm not the same person as when I met you. You are not the same as well. We have been through years of changes, some by our choosing and many not. A term we came familiar with during COVID is liminal space. We've all had those words in our minds. It is a word that I believe we're going to have to be able to live within forever. The days of waiting and we return to what was, when things remain the same for a while, I don't know if they'll ever return again. And that's not good or bad. It requires reorientation, letting go of assumptions, the ability to ground oneself and celebrate moments, to recognize when positive change has occurred, and to live with the constant backdrop of change that may frighten us or may feel out of control, whether that's in regard to climate change, politics, or life in this beloved congregation. Poet Jan Richardson speaks to liminality in her poem, "Blessing for this Place in Between." When you come to the place between, when you've left what you held most dear, and when you are traveling towards the life you know not, when you arrive at the hardest ground, may it become for you a place of rest. May it become for you a place to dream. May the pain that has pressed itself into you give way to the vision, to knowing. May the morning make of itself an altar, a path, a place to begin again. This congregation, you and I, have lived and learned so much from the changes in our lives. I like to hold certain times in our lives as chapters. Some of you who've had one-on-one conversations have heard me refer to chapters, recognizing that lives of people and of organizations evolve. I remember learning when our family went to Transylvania to study our UU roots with Unity Church Unitarian. Corbin, our youngest, was sitting at the table with the oldest traveler with us, and she was sharing her wisdom with this then young man, and she said, you know, you think you know where you're going, and you're traveling along in a journey on a path, and all of a sudden you take a bend, and around the corner is something you have never imagined. We really can't predict even the best planned life. The best we can do is take the bend and live into whatever lies beyond. The search committee that existed when I applied compiled a large packet of information for prospective candidates. There are 2 pages of professional staffing and ministry history. The first professional staff here was hired as a part-time director of religious education in 1986, 17 years after the founding of the congregation. Before professional ministry, the congregation hosted 4 seminary interns. United Theological Seminary was right down the street in New Brighton at that time. The study of whether the congregation should hire a professional minister began in 2000, so 24 years ago, with a task force, we love our task force, which were created to explore the question of whether there should be professional ministry. The document reads that there were some who were uncertain about losing our lay-led character. To address those misgivings, the task force recommended, and the membership agreed, that we would experiment with ministry. The congregation hired a part-time minister with a contract with an evaluation point in the winter of the second year, then when the congregation would vote on whether to continue professional ministry. It didn't go well. The congregation did not create clear shared expectations, and conflict arose between the staff and the minister. The conflict festered and created divisions in the congregation, resulting in some folks leaving. From there, you hired an interim from 2006 to 2007, and then another from 2007 to 2009, and that's when you hired your first called minister, Reverend Dana Reynolds, who served the congregation part-time from 2009 to 2014. Reverend Karen Gustafson followed with a 2-year interim after Dana retired, and then I was called. If you wonder whether this congregation is resilient, just look at your history and you can see that you are. I've learned recently that the average tenure of a minister is 4 years, and some reflect on models like the Methodists, who often reassign ministers about every 7 years. I don't know, perhaps there's wisdom in that model. At the end of this church year, we will have completed 8 years of shared ministry. This has created some sense of stability amidst the chaos in the world around us, and you've come so far since then. It's an extremely healthy congregation that trusts its leadership, its staff, its minister. It's a congregation that values transparency, that encourages all to be heard. It's not the case for many years, when meetings often resulted in bad feelings or conflict, when some voices were prioritized over others. I tell Katie often, and she never really wants to listen to me, that these past years, as we have moved into this format of meetings when everybody speaks, is extraordinary. There is a grace here, a practice of respect and of listening, of curiosity, and the ability to learn and change perspective that makes this congregation a joy to serve. I hope you feel that as well. We never step into the same river twice, and I believe that with that level of health and clarity that exists in you now, you will thrive, no matter what path you choose. Some of you may have heard that the Unitarian Universalist Association, the UUA, now recommends that congregations with less than 125 members structure their church as a contract minister. The idea is that small congregations shouldn't have to weather a 2-year interim and then an expensive search with 3 candidates doing pre-candidating and then bringing somebody in for a week. The search is expensive and extensive, and it has been reevaluated by the UUA. If this, and I think that they actually have kind of looked at the cost versus the impact and the weight for small congregations. If this was a congregation in conflict, an interim is sort of a no-brainer, but it isn't. And in the transition manual, it says that we hire a minister and set up a contract for a specific period, usually a year, sometimes with a list of specific tasks like preaching or pastoral care, especially if it's just a part-time minister. Contracts, they note, may be renewed and modified, and contract ministers are hired by the board, and then they can be called by the congregation, should the call be mutually desirable after a couple years. I know that some of you still carry some of the pain from the past around that contract model and what happened many years ago. But I want you to know that this has become common practice, supported by the UUA, and understood by ministers in search. Actually, Reverend Laura Thompson, who serves over at Bloomington, was hired in this way, so we will tap into her and that congregation just to understand more what it feels like. So now we move to the months of moving forward with what we have started, whether voting on a new name or looking for a new minister and a potential new church home. I'm going to continue to love and support you and your work with the leaders of MSUS to assure the most smooth transition possible. You are no longer one of the best kept secrets in the UUA. You hired an extrovert who brought this congregation into a place where my colleagues in the Twin Cities and beyond are aware of you and your community and the endless desire to serve one another and to serve and impact social change, even though we struggle mightily with that call. Our three values, mindful interdependence, authentic curiosity, and courageous love, are demonstrated in small and large ways by all of you. We will need all of those as we move through the upcoming months together and as you turn towards the future with a new minister. I struggled with what to say today. I didn't want to give you a ministerial report on what we have and have not accomplished. I didn't want to swim in the sadness that has struck me and many of you over this past week. And I didn't want to sugarcoat change. Change is hard, and this one is bittersweet. We all knew at some point I would announce my departure. I had a goal of being with you for 10 years. It was an arbitrary goal that therapists and spiritual directors have worked with me over and over again to be cautious about. My prior tenure in employment had been about 4 years or less, so I am delighted that I broke that pattern with all of you and stayed. And these years have just flown by. As I sheepishly shared that 10-year commitment with the person in Mid-America who was assisting me with kind of thinking through my announcement, she said, "Yeah, Laura, but 8 years in COVID, that's a lot more than 10 years." So I'm trying to cut myself some slack as I recognize that I love all of you in this church and I still decide it's time for me to go. I can watch and support the leaders as they move into transition mode and realize that feeling guilty about causing this extra load is unnecessary. I'm sitting with the concept of bittersweet. For both sadness and joy coexist side by side for all this time, and for during the period they are just surfacing daily, bittersweet, sadness and joy. I want you to know it's been such a gift in my life to serve you all, and I hope it's been the same for you.